Hi, everyone. Just checking if all of you are able to hear me. It will be great if some of you can just confirm in the chat window. Yeah, okay, perfect. Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for the confirmation. Welcome to the session. Vineet, Saurabh, Om, Pranay, Rushad. I can see a lot of you. So great. Thanks for joining. And this is going to be a very quick review analysis of what happened in day one, slot one. First of all, it was delayed. So that was a bit of a problem. But before getting into all those issues, I'm assuming that some of you might be soon going to enter into the slot two. So let me quickly give you the overall analysis first, and then maybe talk about the issues that happened, etc. So first things first, the test indicated that it was going to be sort of a sectional thing, because at the beginning it showed this section, these many number of, that's the number of questions and so on. But the pattern was still jumbled, not so jumbled that it was very arbitrary, but it still was jumbled. Now I'll tell you how it worked for my case. I started with, it just showed 1 to 200 questions. So you will not see sectional split at the top. You will not see logical reasoning. You can click on that and it will show you all logical reasoning questions. That's not going to happen. The question palette appears on the left hand side. You will see questions from 1 to 200 there, without any sectional sort of information as to, okay, this is the section in which these are the questions. So you'll start with 1 to 200 questions. I started with first question, which was logical reasoning. And then I got a series of logical reasoning questions, a lot of them. I would say maybe 20, 25, 30 odd questions, post which I suddenly got a reading comprehension passage. Okay. So then I had, I think, 2 RCs back to back, then a couple of RC questions. Then again, I got some quant questions. Then I got a DI set in between and so on. So it was a little bit random. All the abstract reasoning questions for me appear towards the end, but they were not, say, 176 to 200. Okay. They still were. So maybe a 140 is a abstract reasoning question, or 145 to a 150 is an abstract reasoning, that kind of a thing. But majority of them, or I think I would say all of them, were concentrated in the last 50 odd questions in the order in which I had the question paper. Okay. The order, of course, will vary for different people. The test had no sectional breakup, I repeat, and the pattern was that of CET 23, where all 200 questions appeared in a jumbled manner. The palette appears on the left-hand side, so you'll have to get used to that very quickly. As it has always been the case, there was no negative marking for any incorrect answers. And overall, the test was pretty straightforward. I mean, if you are somebody who has taken IMS Sim CET and have done pretty well in those, I'm sure you must have had fun solving this paper, because the questions were very straightforward. I'll talk about the individual sections as we go along. So starting with the quant section, and roughly I would say the number of questions were 50, right? Because there were some questions, I mean, it sometimes is not even possible to write down the exact number of questions. But I would say quant roughly 50 questions. There were 2 DI sets in this. Okay, so there were the DI sets were pretty straightforward. There was one on there was one on pie chart. So it was again sports. Some categories were given, the angles were given, and the expenditure, and you had to calculate those things. The other one was a table. So it was again just calculations that you had to do for about 5 years, and 5 columns were there. Not too difficult. I think there were five questions on each of those sets. Okay, so somebody who is a well-prepared candidate would have definitely cracked those. Speaking of the individual quant questions, very straightforward. There were some questions which had direct calculations also. For example, a 97 into 97 plus 103 into 103, right? Those kind of questions. But others that you see from arithmetic or from numbers, and there were questions from logarithms, 1 or 2 questions, they were very straightforward. Okay, so just knowledge of the basic formula and all easy to moderate level questions. If you're done for quant, you would have been in a position to solve the entire, all the questions on the quant area. Okay, I found a couple of questions, such maybe a few in TSD, where somebody might have to reread those questions to understand what is happening. there was, I think, one more DI set that I can remember. I mean, if you whether to call it under DI or whatever, it's a separate thing. But then there was something on set theory. Okay, and there were 5 questions on it, like a nice set theory question. 3 subjects were given. People who have passed in 1 subject, failed in 2 subjects, and those kind of information. Not very difficult to do, but it was definitely slightly more difficult than say the other one, the pie chart one that was there. But overall, I think people would have had a nice time solving quant. Even those who typically used to feel that my quant was weak would have done okay or reasonably well in this particular test. Okay. Now, speaking of logical reasoning, and if there are people who took the test and have joined the analysis, would be great to hear how many questions you guys did, what questions you did, were there any issues that happened at your center? Because I'm hearing a lot of reports of people where from different centers where there was an issue. The center where I was also, there was an issue, which I'll talk about towards the end. Um, Now, speaking of logical reasoning, right? The logical puzzles or the caselets that we typically name them as, very straightforward. Okay, so like 7 people, linear arrangement, or family tree with 6 people only with some colors that they like. Then again, arrangement questions with people and some spaces given between them. There were a lot of questions on somebody is 13 from the left end of the row and 18 from the right end of the row, those kind of things. And if the positions are changed, then what happens? Those kind of questions also were there. Some of the logical puzzles were tricky. I think there were a couple of questions which would have stumped a lot of people. But these were standalone logic puzzles, right? So like a figure is given, there are 6 numbers outside that figure, and you had to find the relationship between what those numbers are and the numbers at the center. And people would have found that question difficult. Some of those questions were indeed difficult, and people would have skipped them in the first round for sure. Now, in terms of, as I said, the logical puzzles, the caselets were very simple. I think anybody would have got all the questions because the conditions were very limited. If you think of earlier CET, when IBPS used to conduct it, which used to have maybe 8, 10, 12 conditions, and maybe 8, 10, 12 people. Now you had like only 5, 6 people, and you had to put arrangements there, right? So how difficult was it going to be? That is about the caselets. The standalone logical puzzles, as I said, some questions were doable, some questions people could have skipped. There were a lot of questions on series as well, finding the number series, what's the next term, what is the odd term in the series, and all of that. So standard affair that you see on logical reasoning continued to be there. Now, on the verbal ability and reading comprehension front, so in RCs, there were only 2 RCs with, I think, 5 questions each. They were slightly difficult to read. Okay, they were not very lengthy. They were moderate length, but they were difficult to read and comprehend because of the kind of topics which were chosen, right? So I had a passage on, I think, something about the social aspect, the culture and education. There was one passage on that. There was another one on how man is all greedy and how there is a need for social reforms, kind of a thing. They were slightly difficult to read, but not very lengthy. Somebody could have taken nice 5 minutes out to read the passage, would have been in a position to answer the questions. There were no questions on critical reasoning. So nothing on assumption, inference, conclusion, strengthening or weakening argument. So people who were in this slot would have been very happy to not see those kind of questions. But the other thing was there were a lot of questions on vocab. Okay, so a lot of vocabulary questions, whether it is synonyms, antonyms, or idiom-based questions, they were there. Plus, there were some questions wherein you also had to, the grammatical questions, right? So which part of the sentence contains an error? That was one question type. There was another question type that for italicized part, what is the best replacement that you can have? Okay. Now, there were a lot of questions on arranging words in as if they are in dictionary, right? So there are 5 words which were given. And I think there were 5 or 6 questions like that where you just had to arrange them as they would in the standard dictionary, and just figure out which is the middle word or which is the last word, which is the first word, those kind of questions. Now, whether to put in logical reasoning or to put it in verbal reasoning is a separate discussion. But I would say they were so simple that even a 6th or a 7th grader would have answered those questions, because it's just putting words in as if they are in the dictionary. And but yeah, the synonyms, antonyms is sort of, I think, in my view, going to be a decision maker for a lot of people. Because see, if somebody had, say, slightly slow quant, right, somebody who takes a lot of time to solve quant questions would have still been able to solve majority of the questions because the questions were simple. But then when it comes to vocab based questions, either you know it or you don't, right? So because there were so many vocab questions, people who knew those words would have really enjoyed that particular part of it. But people who had no idea about those words would have struggled a little bit. Okay, so I would say that if you have some time, you can go through vocab. No point overdoing it in the last minute. But then just to have like a cursory glance at a few things won't really hurt. Plus, idioms or proverbs can also be looked at. So that's about VRC. And lastly, abstract reasoning, fairly straightforward, nothing on paper cutting, folding, etc. Just identifying what is going to be, say, the next thing in the series, or identifying a similar, dissimilar pair, or the odd image out of the figures that were given. Okay, so that is how the overall paper was. They stayed pretty close to the distribution that they had initially mentioned. So that's why I've written approximately 50 and approximately 75 and so on. Again, it depends on how you classify some of those questions. Some people, depending on some question, they can say it is verbal reasoning. Some people call it logical reasoning and so on. Syllogisms definitely were there. And by the way, good news, they were not very difficult. Okay, so there were 4 statement syllogisms and there were 2 statement syllogisms as well. But pretty straightforward. If you had drawn the figure, you would have got the answer. Another question type, there were quite a few of those which were that 3 words are given and you're supposed to find the best Venn diagram representation which represents it, right? So for example, names of 2 planets and the word planet is given, right? So how does it look if you were to put it in the form of sets? Okay, so that is the overall feel of the paper. I would have put easy across all the sections. I mean, there was nothing where even we are thinking of putting maybe moderate at a couple of places, but then it honestly was a fairly straightforward paper, right? So I think a lot of people would have attempted, especially people who are doing very well on the sim CETs, our mock test series would have definitely gone beyond 160 170 attempts. I won't be surprised if a topper crosses 170. Okay, so that's my hunch for this particular slot, that a topper should be north of 170. I'm going to take some questions that you guys have given in the chat window. So how will be slot 3? We definitely don't know how it is going to be. We'll wait for slot 2 to see if there are any changes, etc. Understand that the difficulty of the slot is a very subjective assessment, plus from slot to slot it can vary. So I would not suggest you to read too much into it. I want you to look at this analysis and just prepare mentally yourself for what is going to happen. Okay, because the number of questions can vary. I mean, in my slot I had 3 DI, maybe you get 2 DI sets. That's okay, right? But then mentally you should be prepared for an easy paper and aim to solve as many questions as you can. Because when you get an easy paper, similar to what happened in CET 2015, the ultimate decision maker is not really the speed part of it, but the content part of it. So if you have very strong content and accuracy, then you will be able to do better. Okay, so speed generally does not become a decision maker in very, very easy papers. Yeah, and Shalini, as she has mentioned, paper was easy, but there were errors, which I will talk about. There were a couple of questions where I felt that the answer was, there was something wrong with the question, but I don't think there were more than 5 such questions. So people can straight away ignore that. LOD means level of difficulty. What about input-output questions? Nothing. Vineet, there were no input-output questions in this particular slot. Sriram has asked, were there any questions from parajumbles? So there were no questions on parajumbles. Okay, nothing, not a single question. Om is saying some people got 180 minutes while some got 150 minutes as it showed a 3-hour timer. Yeah, that's the issue that happened, Om. So see, what happens is a lot of times when students start the test, right, they don't look at the timer. So they will just start solving. Plus, a lot of them might not even be carrying analog watches, which are allowed at a few places. Now, what happened was the test started at 9 o'clock. Around 11:30, right? I don't remember the exact time, but around 11:30, everybody was still seeing somewhere around 20-25 minutes to go. Okay, so on the timer either was faulty, maybe it started at 150 and there was some fault, or it started at 180, which is a fair possibility as well. As Om is saying, that a lot of people saw 180 on the timer. Now the problem is people went with what they were seeing on screen, not paying attention to what the actual time is, right? And that's obvious. You will see what is there on the server time. Now, what happened was with 20-25 minutes to go, roughly, I don't again remember the exact thing. Everybody in where I had my center, all the computers showed that the connection to the server is lost. And then everybody started panicking, right? Then the guy came after 5 minutes or so, and he said that, okay, you have to restart the system, restart the window, etc. And then the surprise was everybody saw just 1 minute to go, right? And that is the issue that happened. So I would encourage all of you, every single person, to carry an analog watch with you. Okay, whether you're going today, maybe if you have it already, great. If you don't have it, please pay attention to the time. Okay, just check the timer once when you start the test. If it is 180, please understand that it will stop the moment it shows 30 minutes to go, right? Because the duration is 150 minutes. Please carry an analog watch. That is my recommendation, so that you don't really get bogged down by these issues. Okay, so it is a problem. And I guess a lot of students missed out because of that. So there were people behind me. Once the final submit button was there, you could see that maybe people have just marked 160, 140, 150, etc. People were not even able to mark all 200 questions because they were working with that assumption that they're going to have another 25-30 minutes ahead of them, and that is how they were solving the test. So it definitely was a problem. Coding decoding, decoding as such, you didn't have a lot of questions, but there were questions on, I mean, again, what sort of coding decoding you're asking, but there were questions on, this is coded as this, so that is coded as what. Okay, it wasn't like a very symbol based coding. Symbol based coding was not there. Everything was letters. Everything was either letter based coding or number based coding. Sequential output, no. There were no questions on sequential output, like input output questions were not there in the slot that I had. What about geometry questions? Didn't see any geometry questions, but there was one logical puzzle on numbers, which were actually Pythagorean triplets. But otherwise, I didn't see particularly geometry questions directly. Directions questions involve some application of geometry. So maybe those are the questions. Maybe I think there were 4 or 5 questions related to directions, which required understanding of a little bit of geometry. But otherwise, you didn't have anything on direct things like equilateral triangle properties or circle properties and all those things. Number system questions, number theory, I would say there wasn't anything, but there was one question like, I think if you have so many pages in a book, how many zeros are you using, right? So that is an actual application of a number system question. Or you can think of it as a permutation combination question also. There were questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions on logarithms, 1 or 2 questions on indices, but otherwise nothing major from number system. Number series, yes, there were quite a few questions on number series. I would say about 5 questions. I don't remember the exact count, but then with some pattern, you could figure out what the logic was in most of them. I think there was only one question where it was like very arbitrary, but otherwise, most of the people would have got it. So paper P&C, yes, there were questions on probability and P&C as well. How many arrangements are possible for a particular word was asked in permutation combination. In probability, there was a question on cards. So you're drawing so many cards. And there was another probability question on when so many people apply to a job, so many people get rejected. So what is the probability that XYZ, something was there. And then there was another question that if so many percentage of candidates get rejected, how many should be interviewed, which is technically not a probability question, but a percentage question. Blood relations, easy or tough? There were 2 types of blood relation questions. One was part of a logical caselet. So 6 people, their relationships are given and their genders are given and so on. But a lot of these direct questions on blood relations also appeared. I think there were definitely 5 questions at least, wherein somebody is pointing at a person and saying that this is my grandfather's son's only daughter, those kind of questions. So what is the exact relationship between those 2 people? So there were 5 or 6 questions of those type for sure. Puzzle types, the logical caselets, if you're asking, logical reasoning caselets, they were extremely straightforward with 5 questions on each. One that I can remember was on, of course, the blood relation puzzle that I spoke about. There was one on scheduling some classes or topics across 7 days. 7 topics, 8 days was the thing given. There was a set about people sitting facing north, and then some arrangement had to be done. Yeah, I think it was fairly doable. I guess anybody who has practiced enough for CET would have pretty much solved all the logical puzzles. There was nothing which was like very, very difficult. Plus, I guess there was only one question in that blood relation thing where I felt that the language of the caselet wasn't great, but otherwise, pretty direct questions. Any circular puzzle with directions? Sriram, nothing in my slot at least, but maybe in other slots it might make an appearance. Samir, yes, I have mentioned about the timer issue. I encourage everybody to carry an analog watch with you when you go for the test, because if you carry a digital watch, they'll not allow you. If you carry a nice analog watch, they will allow you. And timer issue was definitely there. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen from here. It's a fairly unfortunate thing that they take it so lightly and conduct a test in this particular manner. I mean, I was so surprised at my particular center. I don't think this will happen at a lot of other places, but at my center, the rough sheets that were given were absolutely pathetic, because the way it was given was generally what happens is you get a blank A4 sheet, right? On both sides, it is blank. But at my center where I was, they truly thought it is a rough sheet. So it actually had some stuff written on one side. So it had, think of how you had those exam papers wherein one side will be printed, the other side will be blank. We were given those rough sheets actually. So when these bodies are conducting the test, it is so unfortunate that they don't look at all these things, right? It's so important for students to have a very calm environment. Plus, all these facilities should be there, right? Giving them nice rough sheets, making sure that the timer is correct in the first place, right? To begin with, if you're conducting a test, the timer has to work correctly on the server. How can you have those kind of issues? So it's pretty unfortunate. I guess a lot of students will end up writing to the CET cell about these issues. We'll have to wait and watch what exactly they do with it. Generally, retest is not an option because it favors some people, it will not favor some people. So typically, in my experience, whatever I've seen in the past with respect to CET, there has never been a retest. Okay, so that possibility is very unlikely. I think CET cell will not really do anything, but then people should definitely write to them, informing about the issue, because it's a genuine problem that happened, right? I mean, people are going to trust what they see on screen, especially if they are not carrying an analog watch, or they given on the wall of that particular test venue. So it's pretty unfortunate that they did this. Any questions on remainders, number systems? Remainders, I didn't find any question, but there were questions on divisibility. So which of the following numbers is divisible by 3, 9, 7, 11, right? That was one of the questions that I had. Or which of the following numbers is divisible by 9? I mean, as straightforward as that also made an appearance in the paper today. Grammar, quite a bit of grammar. So minimum of 5 questions for sure. A, B, C, D, E as in given. So 4 parts. If there is no error, you mark E, right? So quite a few questions of that, but nothing which is very, very difficult within that. So if you know your grammar rules, I think you would have been in a position to answer all of it. Is there going to be an analysis for other slots today? No point doing it. I mean, once the first slot is out, the others pretty much follow the same suit. So no point. We are not going to do any analysis for the second slot. We'll give an overall analysis on Monday as to what the expectations in terms of scores, etc., could be. AC is saying, I don't know how, but paper was really easy. Yeah, I mean, it felt a lot like CET 2015 when the toppers were north of 180, right? So I won't be surprised if that happens this year also. Okay, but on a conservative side, I will say the topper will still go beyond 170. Now, we don't know whether they will finally announce marks and percentile, because last year they gave only percentile. Nobody knew their marks last year. So that might still happen this year. You just get a percentile and you stay happy with that, without knowing how much you got in terms of the absolute marks. Algebra questions, not too many, plus very basic calculations were involved. And for example, a number when reduced by X value becomes so much percent of it. So whatever. So just basic calculations. If you're asking me, were there questions from quadratic equations or cubic equations? The answer is no. Time and work questions, some of them required you to do a bit of number crunching. And there was one time speed distance question where while solving it might have become a quadratic equation, but otherwise no direct questions on quadratic or cubic. And definitely very, very straightforward quant otherwise. Myron is asking why we need to carry analog watch. Myron, because there was a technical server timer issue wherein it showed 180 minutes for a lot of people on the timer. So people didn't pay much attention to that, and it created a problem for a lot of people. Floors question, reasoning. No questions on floors, but then see, I would put it this way. All the logical caselets that appeared, right, involved some sort of an arrangement, whether it is linear or blood relation based, but some sort of an arrangement was there. Now, nothing on floors appeared in my slot, but then it can always appear in some other slots, right? It's just changing the orientation in which you're doing the arrangement. Algebra questions, as I said, nothing very direct on quadratic or cubic, but then some application was there in time and work of, I mean, while solving that time and work question, because there is that question type, right? Some of you might be familiar with it, where they say that a person takes so much time, the other person takes maybe 6 more days than this person, but together they take so much time. Now, sometimes while solving these questions, if you're not using ratio or proportion methods to solve, you end up getting into a quadratic. So that appeared, but I don't think it was that difficult to solve. Direct था question, इतना direct कहीं नहीं देखा मैंने. So yeah, ACI, they were extremely direct questions. Nidhi has asked clocks and calendars question. One question from each. There was one question on clocks and one question on calendar. AK has asked, what if any slot comes out to be difficult? Will there be a normalization? As far as we know, they don't really normalize, or how they normalize, we don't know. Maybe they do it. Ideally, they should do it, but then you never know what exactly they do. I mean, last year, for example, slot 1, there was nobody at a 99.99, or even a 99.9 plus, there was nobody. So there's a little bit of that gray area. We don't know what exactly happens under the hood. But yeah, let's hope for the best. Maybe this year we can just pray that things don't go that way. Art Splash is saying, even in my center, Ranchi, only 5-6 people were there whose exam finished on time, while majority of the section got even more than 180 plus minutes. That's very, very unfortunate. We suggest people to write to CET cell about this, but then I'm not very hopeful that they will take any action. We'll have to wait and watch about what happens for other slots and centers. How many questions on DI? As I said, 3 sets, one on table, one on pie chart, and one on set theory. How many RCs? 2 RCs, fairly moderate to read. Both of them had 2 paragraphs, but moderate in the sense that the length was moderate. The difficulty was there. I mean, because of the words, because of the language of the passage. Was it manageable? I would say definitely. So if you're somebody who was getting, let's say, 100 plus on the sim CETs, right? I think your score will easily boost by maybe 20, 30 or even more. Okay. All right. So I think we are done with about 30 minutes of discussion on this. I hope it has helped you and given you guys an understanding of what happened. Great if people can comment with their attempts and expected score, etc. Once the video goes live, then you can always even drop a comment if you have any questions, any follow-up that you may have. Okay. But otherwise, I think we are good to end the session at this point of time. Just taking one last question from Ajinkya, whether there was any match the following. No, there was no match the following. And Varad Raju, don't know when the CMAT is going to be. Hopefully first half of April, but then let's wait and watch. Okay. All right, great. Thanks everyone for joining. Wish all of you all the best for if you're taking slot 2 today, but I think most of the people would have already entered the test venue. People who are taking day 2 tomorrow, slot 1, slot 2, wish all of you all the best. Be mentally prepared for an easy test. And what happens when you get those easy balls, you start hitting, right? So be on top of the game from the first question, be fast, make sure that you do a lot of questions, mark everything before you end the test, and pay attention to the timer. Carry an analog watch, it will always come very handy. Okay, so that's it from my side. Great, thanks everyone for joining, and once again wish all of you all the best. Bye everyone, take care.